Welcome back. Third episode of Broadway and Breakaways. I'm willing to officially call this a habit, a routine. I'm no longer just talking Predators to myself, but I have at least a couple hundred of you are listening in, whether I'm talking about USA hockey, Nashville Predators, my favorite moments. This is just fun for me and to talk about my favorite team. So to continue that, well, we've got the trade deadline news. We've got a lot. We also had the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference this past weekend, which for those who don't know, I am getting my MBA at MIT Sloan. Every year for the last 20 years, they've hosted a huge sports analytics conference. And this year I got to help out with some of the hockey panels. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So we have the excitement of, the industry. We're going to talk some Nashville Predators. But I want to open real quick with one thing that I omitted from my last podcast. And, the story about the U.S. hockey is great, U.S. men's and women's. But one thing that, I can't believe I forgot, as someone that has loved broadcasting, I'm just standing here in front of a microphone getting to talk to you just one-on-one or one on a million, however many of you are going to listen to this. And I have always looked up to some of the greatest broadcasters that are out there, whether it's been Doc Emmerich or Al Michaels, or back in Nashville, Pete Weber and Terry Crisp, who sadly recently passed away. It's very, very exciting to see the beauty of the broadcaster who brings everything to life for the hockey game. So when I'm watching the Olympics, and all of us are watching the Olympics, we saw the beauty of Mike Tirico's and his now famous final monologue after the U.S. hockey. But I want to give a lot of credit to Kenny Albert. And Kenny Albert has been calling all four major professional sports in the United States, hockey, baseball, basketball, and football, for the last 20 years or so, and is now the official voice of the New York Rangers. He's calls baseball. Just the other night, I turned on the World Baseball Classic to get his familiar voice. And I don't think that we can talk about Megan Keller's overtime winner for the U.S. women's gold, or Jack Hughes burying the overtime winner against Canada for the men's gold, without talking about the excitement that Kenny Albert brought. And one thing that I didn't know, maybe I was living under a rock, but Kenny is Marv Albert's son. I should have seen this coming. Marv Albert, who is famous for his NBA broadcasting, for all of the 20, 30-something-year-olds, too, who grew up listening to his voice on NBA 2K, are very familiar. But Kenny is, just a humble guy who loves bringing the story to life. And a lot of my inspiration has come from the broadcasters and people like him, people like Doc and Al Michaels, who really know how to bring the story to life. Al Michaels famously said in the 1980 game, you might not know the difference between a blue line or a clothesline, but you're tuning in. And when the 2010 and 2014 Olympics were coming around, even Al Michaels was ready to pass the torch on to Doc Emmerich. And Doc Emmerich, for those who don't know, he has retired, but he was the iconic voice of especially playoff hockey and national broadcasts with NBC. And as a kid, I remember sitting in my basement, where our TV was, in Saturday afternoon, and there'd just be, some electric Bruins Caps round one action. And he made a Eastern Conference round one game come to life for me when I couldn't have, it had no impact on the Predators. And I attribute a large part of, the growth of hockey for me, for the league generally, to someone like him. And I love it. His story too. He's a PhD who growing up just loved hockey. And I believe he's from Indiana, and he would go to minor league games in Fort Wayne as a 7-year-old. And he would sit by himself with his own tape recording device. And he eventually, long after getting into his career, just decided he could not step away from hockey any longer. And he went on and worked with the New Jersey Devils, and then eventually became pretty much what a lot of people would still attribute as the voice of hockey. So I, again, wanted to give that shout out, as that's a lot of my inspiration for how I get excited right here to talk by myself about hockey. Is I think about people also who they didn't play the game. In Nashville, we only have 2 rinks. It was not a super accessible game, but the league brought it to be accessible to our TVs, to our excitement levels, to our fan bases. And, that's why I'm here today. So kind of with that, we pivot into the Nashville Predators, whereas in some of the episodes past, we've been in the Olympic break, we've had other Olympic stories. Right now, the Nashville Predators are front and center on what we'll be talking about here and for most of this podcast before I get onto the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference and sort of some of the bigger trends and excitement that we're seeing with hockey. The trade deadline ended on Friday, and it's safe to say that this had the ability to be one of the most gratifying deadlines in Predators history. As a non-contender in years past when David Poile was at the helm, somewhere in those like 2012 to 2019 years, it always felt like David Poile was making a trade. And in the beginning of those years, it often felt like David Poile was fleecing teams and winning the trade. And then it started to flip on its head when we did not get any really good talent. We were giving out first rounders. I'm actually wearing a Predators themed Christmas sweater, sort of as an homage to that, where we were giving other people very late Christmas gifts. Instead, we ended up putting ourselves one step behind, it seemed like, until we would chip away, and now no longer are the Predators legitimate contenders, and nor have they been since roughly the 2018-2019 season when they did win the division, but the offense was becoming pretty dangerously low, riding Pecorine, and then shortly after riding UC Saros, who were putting on Vezina-worthy seasons. The Nashville Predators sort of have a good and a bad thing going for them when it comes to attracting talent. They are in one of the favorite cities for people to live in, for people to play in, and for fans to enjoy a game. So it's no surprise that once Paul Kariya and Peter Forsberg set the tone for big name players who would actually come to this new market and prove that hockey was real here, that it started to follow. However, it didn't necessarily continue in the direction that we would have probably liked to see. When Barry Trotz took over in Nashville, many as the general manager, several people in Nashville might remember that he said that Nashville is not a place where you should come to retire. And that in large part was surrounding players like Matt Duchene. And that almost felt like a one-liner that he said to Matt Duchene. For those who aren't familiar with the entire Matt Duchene saga, for years, it felt like every trade deadline was the deadline that we were going to trade for Matt Duchene, either from Colorado or from Columbus. And it never happened. Eventually, he becomes a free agent and signs with the Nashville Predators. However, that deal looked pretty good in the beginning. He was scoring electric. He had some great seasons. I think he even had one, if not even two, 40-goal seasons, which had never been done before in Predators history. However, it was starting to. He was no longer at the peak of his career. There are a lot of questions as to whether he was viewing Nashville as, I love country music, I love the city, I still have good hockey, and I want to stay there and sort of settle down there. And, I get it. Like, I'm from Nashville. I see the intrigue. And so do a lot of our, away fans who come and view Nashville as their road trip destination. But I think slowly and surely it started to catch on a little bit more as the city became more and more desirable, that sometimes people, seasoned veterans, knew that they wanted to get to Nashville. I'm looking at Ryan O'Reilly and Steven Stamkos right now, who are both officially going to be on the Nashville Predators roster until at least the end of this regular season. We'll see if they get traded in the offseason. But those two had significant value in this trade deadline and stood very firm on their no-move clauses. Like very, very, very firm. And eventually, Steven Stamkos had said he would be willing to entertain moving under a couple conditions. And that was really surprising to me. These are two guys, both have won a cup, but neither that recently. Ryan O'Reilly back in 2019 with the Blues, which at this point is now 7 years ago. And It's sort of frustrating because the franchise is a little bit hamstrung by this decision on the no move clause contracts. Now, I'm not going to fault the players for making those decisions at all. Like, that is well within their NHLPA protected rights. That has to exist. But we saw this scenario arise more than once during this deadline season, primarily with Colton Parayko. For those who don't follow the Blues as intensely, but maybe they follow the rise of the Buffalo Sabres, they would have seen that the Sabres were pretty close to getting this elite defenseman, but someone leaked the trade, and Parayko had actually had not wanted to change his no move trade clause. And they thought that they'd be able to make it happen, and he stood firm with it. And that's one of these big anomalies that's now becoming a little bit more and more common in hockey, is people who don't want to move, and they're not even willing to move their no trade clause. We don't see this happen as much in other sports, or we might, but then they start to say, I'm willing to entertain moving it more because maybe they still want to be in a place where they can win. Of course, you want to be in a place where you're wanted, in a place where you can still compete. So that was sort of like this presiding theme and notion around the trade deadline as Nashville gets closer and closer. Before the Olympic break, nothing of note had happened for the Predators. We knew that we would go into this kind of 3-week dead period, and all we could do was hope that when we got back, we either proved somehow that we were elite contenders, or we proved that exactly what many other people thought, that we are not contenders, that we have some young talent, we have some old talent, but this team is not going to win the Stanley Cup. And even if they do make the Stanley Cup playoffs, which right now they're positioned right around a 20% chance, their first series would be against the Colorado Avalanche, who are the best team in hockey, sold out to get as much as possible at this trade deadline. So they went from being the best team already to now they're kind of filling in all of their weaknesses. No team in the NHL stands a shot against Colorado as it stands right now, let alone a wild card 2 in the first round. I tuned in a little bit to the Avs Wild game this past Sunday, and the Avs and the Stars already had a crazy game just a couple days before. The Avalanche, I actually had learned this statistic. Entering the third period in games where they had the lead, they're 33-0-0. I mean, 33-0-0. They have never lost a game, even in overtime, when they've entered the third period with a lead. Now that is 34-0-0. Even though they were up 1-0 against the Wild, they gave up a shorty and then a power play goal. They then tied it and then won the game very quickly. Not into overtime, in the shootout, of course, with Nathan MacKinnon leading the way. That is crazy levels of confidence. The Predators are a team that rarely gets the first goal. And if they're behind, they are not known for having an explosive offense that can change the game at will. They don't tilt the ice in their direction. Instead, they often like to play close and chippy games and see what they can do to stay in it late. Well, that's not going to work against Colorado, who's probably going to be up 2 goals by the end of the second period in every game. And then Nashville won't be able to tilt it back. Scott Wedgwood is playing incredible hockey for them, albeit one of Nashville's biggest trade decisions, which was letting him go as their backup. Understandably, who could have seen that he would be as strong as he did? The Avalanche power play is lethal, way more so than the Predators, even though that has been one of the bright spots, I should say, especially with young talent like Matthew Wood and Luke Evangelista. But all this to say is I think everyone and their mother was able to see that the Predators were not going to be competing successfully for a Stanley Cup. And yet here we are now at the deadline, and we're starting to figure out what's going to happen. So a couple days before the deadline, the Predators do start to make some moves. And the first one, I guess, happens when we're playing the Columbus Blue Jackets. So we're now 3 games in post-break. We have beaten the Blackhawks by a game. The scoreboard does not make it look as close as it was, thanks to some empty netters. lose to Detroit on this Monday afternoon matinee game, so the NHL could try to capture some of the Olympic momentum that we had in Europe. I give them credit for doing that, but I have a lot of issues with the actual context of that game and how that's done from a business perspective in the United States. And then we lose to the Stars. Kind of literally as scripted. If you listen to my last podcast, I talk a little bit about my predictions with those games. Everything went to the T with how we would have expected the Predators to play. So now comes the Columbus Blue Jackets on a Wednesday night. And it is weird because anytime that a team is getting ready for trade deadline, it's bizarre, buyers and sellers alike, because people are going to move. And I don't want to take away from how difficult this is for a player. They are forced to move without much indication, say, or willingness on their part, and they have to move with their families or just upend their lives, and who knows where they're going to, and if they even will know anybody or be, how well they'll gel with the new team. So again, I really don't want to take away from that experience. There have been so many sad, emotional moments where a player gets traded mid-game. Seen a lot of those in baseball in particular. So the Predators are playing the Blue Jackets, and before the game, Cole Smith and Michael McCarron are listed as they're not practicing due to game management. And then Michael McCarron is not playing, and Cole Smith is going to play. We'll get to Cole Smith in a second. So Michael McCarron, it's announced early, is traded to the Minnesota Wild for a 2028 second-round pick. And, I'm in business school. I'm going to take it down to some discounting. Obviously, a 2028 second is not quite as valuable as potentially a 2026 third, because if you're trying to address issues now, we won't be able to get any value on Michael McCarron until 2028. But he was on an expiring contract, fourth line center for us. I hate to say this. This sounds like, as I never like to rag on players, but there isn't anything you could make as a montage for him or Cole Smith if they were to return to Nashville with their new teams. And we'll talk about Cole Smith, like I said, in just a second. Michael McCarron was, he's good on the penalty kill. He's a great shot blocker. He's huge. He's 6'5", I think, 6'6". And the Wild seemingly loved that. And they've done this before when they've gotten other big Nashville Predators forwards. They actually have a history of several of them, with Ryan Hartman, who's not big, but going for some of our depth, Yakov Trenin. And I think that everyone in Nashville, everyone in the league thought, what did you see? The Wild just looked at his size and determined this guy's got to be our fourth line center. And after they've traded for Quinn Hughes, and now they've added Foligno, so they have both Foligno brothers on the team, it feels a little bit like, okay, surely they're trying to go all in with a defense as strong as they've got. But then they add this as their fourth line center, and then an injured Foligno. It feels like they have a lot of questions that they will have to answer for if they're not able to get some offensive production from their third and fourth lines as the season goes on. Kind of funny, in his first game, McCarron did score a goal, which is funny because it was a pretty rare occurrence in Nashville. If he scored a goal, Nashville Twitter almost had a GIF that we would sort of circulate to be like, oh my God, the big man scored a goal. Because anytime he scored, it was just off of a deflection. He had no slap shot or wrist shot to speak of. Big body that just liked to stand in front of the net. Okay. So a lot of people thought, again, we come across, wow, I cannot believe we got anything for this guy on an expiring contract who's been a perennial fourth line center. Great guy, great culture guy, but just not someone that we're looking to build around, and not sure how someone else saw that as part of their playoff run. Things got really awkward, though, shortly into the game. In the first period, Cole Smith comes out for his first shift. Average shift, 45, 60 seconds. For a fourth liner, it might be a little bit less. He averages probably under 12 minutes a game. His first shift was 3 seconds, and that would be his only shift, because Cole Smith was then sent to the Las Vegas Golden Knights for a third rounder in 2028. So Cole Smith Also on an expiring contract, also a fourth line winger who does not score much for us. Again, pretty good on the penalty kill. But again, not an offensive production or not used for offensive production or someone that we will be building around. I'll give Barry Trotz a lot of credit here, in that we were able to turn two guys on an expiring contract who are fourth liners into a second and a third round pick. Sure, it's in 2 years from now, but I don't think anyone is expecting the Predators to win the Stanley Cup in the next 2 years. We might not even make the playoffs for a couple years. But there's starting to be this relief, this like we recognize that we are going to start rebuilding. The young guys will start getting playing time. And again, I said this in the last podcast. That's a lot of what we want to see. Guys who have been performing really well in Milwaukee, or maybe they're not even at their best yet, but it's time to see what they can bring to the table, because we need to give them more experience and playing time and let them get their NHL reps in when we're not competing, to grow their own experience. The trend continues. The Predators make a few more trades. The two most notable that were left were good ones. I won't deny it, but I think that it left us like just wanting a little bit more. So on Thursday, the Predators had traded Michael Bunting, who they had just acquired from the Penguins in the offseason, or through free agency. They sent him to the Stars for a third round pick I think in 2027. Fine. Someone else who's been traded now at every deadline. He's a good second, third line forward who will add some depth to Dallas. Good for them if they're able to make a run. They're incredibly hot. Maybe the only team in the league, possibly, if not the West for sure, maybe even the league, that will be able to threaten the Avalanche. So this is now Thursday night, and the Predators are hosting the Bruins, who are in a playoff spot in the East. And it has this feeling like, oh my God, we're such a depleted team. We're getting guys who are playing in their first NHL minutes. They have performed nothing to speak of. We are fully expecting to get blown out. And to be clear, this happens a lot. Even if you're not trying in full sell mode, even if you're in buy now mode, a lot of times you were sending maybe some fourth liners away for maybe a second line defenseman. You're just not ready to fill in your roster. Maybe you've called in your minor leaguers to fill in, and it's not uncommon that you just have a depleted roster for a game. So you're hoping that you can pull something out. In Nashville's case, I would say that they were just hoping to look competitive, and we got something far from it, in a good way or a bad way, depending on how you look at it. The bad perspective is, if you think that the Predators should be tanking for the lottery pick, this game did not stand up to that. In a good way, if you thought that the Predators have been waiting on good young talent and they finally got a chance to succeed, well, then you'd be in luck, because that's exactly what happened. The Bruins came to town, and the Predators smashed their face in, primarily in the second period. Matthew Wood, who had a resurgence of his own, not even a resurgence, I would say his jumping into the league was so strong earlier this year. He had a hat trick at Madison Square Garden. He's been scoring on the power play, and he had 2 goals against the Bruins. And then, kind of most excitingly, is Ryan Ufko, who was a draft pick from, I'm trying to remember the year, within the last couple years, a really highly touted defensive prospect for the Predators, gets his first NHL point. And it's cool. It was assisted by, I think it was Evangelista and on Forsberg's goal, and Stamkos is the one that helped lead the play. So for a kid like that to be able to get his first point, to have that type of experience, is so exciting. And I think there was this energy in Bridgestone that kind of had this like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Trade deadline's not over. We're still going to get a lot more, and we'll get to see more of these young guys come forward. Well, that was a short-lived dream. The next day, the trade deadline is at 3 p.m. Eastern, and I'm now at the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, and I think, like all the other hockey fans, we're updating Twitter or ESPN or whatever your preferred journalistic outlet is to get updates on this like crazy. Just scrolling. And I'm suddenly not seeing quite as much as I would have liked from the Predators standpoint. Things come, things go, hearing rumors. It looks like Ryan O'Reilly and Stamkos are being a little bit more generous with their willingness to move. And then it becomes pretty clear it's not going to happen. There's not enough time left for a true move to happen. But you never know. You want to like hold your breath, because a lot of times in the past, there have been trades that go through in the last 30 seconds, but you won't hear about it for a couple more minutes. And, that's probably some of the game theory in this. Both sides are negotiating really, really intensely with each other, and they want to get the best deal possible. Well, that didn't happen. The Predators did sneak one more trade in, though, and that was Jonathan Marchessault, who I am actually shocked they were able to get as much value as they did for him. He's been injured most of his time in Nashville. He has not been a super productive scorer when he's been on the ice, but he's been a good veteran presence. But this year, he's been like kind of a non-starter. And the Predators did manage to turn him also to Dallas and get a first rounder, and then I wouldn't even call him a defensive prospect. Sam Steele, I would say at this point, he's 28. He's just kind of a depth defenseman, somewhat of a salary dumping move, if I had to guess, also on the Dallas side. But we got a first round pick out of Jonathan Marchessault. Okay, so we walk away. We got a first for Marchessault, a second for McCarron, a third for Smith, a third for Bunting. And then there was one other trade that they had made with Colorado. And that was, let me confirm, it was, I think it was a later round pick that we got for a depth defenseman as well. So all in all, it's sort of like this bittersweet trade deadline, because the Predators kind of got their hopes up, or our fans did, that we were really ready to sell. You kept seeing the value of players going around just flying off the board. Nick Waugh going for, I think, a first rounder to Colorado. Everyone thought that there would be these huge, like that people were overpaying so much that this is a year that centers could go and people would give up a first. Eric Holla was even talked about a lot. Again, I sort of, not to toot my own horn, I called this a little bit in the last pod. After his relatively unbelievable play with Finland in the Olympics, I think he elevated his draft stock or his trade value a lot. And the Predators did not choose to move him. Ryan O'Reilly, who is a significantly better center, did not want to move. And they would have gotten at least a first rounder and a prospect for him. And I would say the same for Stamkos with the team. I think the Islanders and the Lightning were the two that were inquiring. He would bring a lot of scoring presence to any of those teams. Again, since his first 22 games, I think he's been averaging about a point per game. He's up to around 30 goals when he had only 4 in his first 22. He is truly one of the hottest scorers in the NHL at this point in time. And Barry Trotz comes out, as most GMs do. They give their 15 minutes after the deadline. They give their presser. They try to talk the fans through the thought process, the strategy, the direction. And he talks about how he thought it was important to keep some of these veterans around for the younger guys and to almost pour salt in the open wound or twist the knife. He mentions that they were getting good offers. And this, to me, feels just a little bit like why Barry Trotz is probably not returning. And I don't know if it was his own decision. My guess is it's a little bit mutual, that the Predators politely asked him, because everything he's done for the franchise shouldn't go unwritten and unnoticed, but this has been a bit of a failed experiment. Why, when you are rebuilding, should you be worrying about a 35-year-old veteran center who is going to score 30 goals a game, get numerous assists, and be your power play one center? Why do you need to worry about that for teaching the young guys? There will be plenty of guys around, and that is more of the coach's responsibility. Andrew Brunette is a former player. He has taken teams into the playoffs. Why would you not try to get as many draft picks and prospects now? Look at the Avalanche. As in some ways, I respect the hell out of what they've done, but I also hate it because they tanked or were horrible. And you could argue forever. They were really bad for many years, really since the late 90s, early 2000s. That was sort of obviously their last huge, we're on top of the mountain moment. For the next roughly 15 years, they were sort of the laughingstock of the league. And then in 2018, they finally make the playoffs. They get bounced actually by the Predators, but it was clear that McKinnon was a problem. The next year, Makar comes with the Hobey Baker Award in his pocket, leaves college, goes straight into the playoffs, and he was dynamite. He was just electric, unstoppable, so fast, and nothing has changed with that. He's only gotten better, and it's really just, you have to wonder somewhat with the Norris Trophy, should it be his every year? And it's sort of like the LeBron effect in the NBA that we get so used to seeing someone be so good at their position and in the league that you forget that they've set the bar so high that if they don't match their own, if someone else outperforms themselves or looks like the second best, or maybe flirts with being the best, that we start handing it to them. But, until proven otherwise, I find it really hard to argue against Cale Makar being the best defenseman in the world. And they had they're not at their peaks anymore, but Rantanen and Landeskog, and now that they traded away Sam Girard and Devon Taves, they're loaded. And this is a team that built up. Of course, they got lucky with some of to get access to players like McKinnon and Makar because they were not first overall picks, but they were top picks. That pays dividends. And I actually saw a graphic recently that was looking at some of the best teams right now in the league and how they built. And almost all of them built because they had a top 5 lottery pick that turned into the anchor, the staple on their team. All of them except for Minnesota, who just happened to hit a home run on Kirill Kaprizov in the 5th round. So the point of that should not be that we're going to hit a home run in the 5th round, but it should be that if we don't have it, we need to get that top 5 pick. Look at Macklin Celebrini right now, 19 years old, and he has a legitimate case to win the Hart. I don't think he will, but he will get votes. Especially if San Jose makes the playoffs, because they are a young team. He is wildly, wildly talented and super, super young and could get 100 points in the season. Now, this concept of hit the home run in the 5th round has sort of defined, I think a lot of Nashville fans would say, the Nashville Predators' approach to hockey. Ever since we made the Stanley Cup in 2017, I think this is both the beauty and the downside of hockey. And I actually had a chance to tell this to Bill Daly, who's the deputy commissioner of the NHL, on Saturday. But we're waiting to go on stage, and I said, Nashville is a hockey town, and we love it. But I think one of the worst things that could have happened to our franchise in the last 10 years is that we made the Stanley Cup final as an 8 seed. And it realigned these incentives to think that all we have to do is make the playoffs. And if we just make the playoffs, maybe we'll get lucky. Maybe we'll ride a hot goaltender. Or maybe, some of our early forwards are just going to be indestructible. You think about Forsberg in those years, maybe Evangelista is going to be like that. Our 3rd and 4th lines were scoring. That was so critical. Our penalty kill was great. Our power play was converting. A lot of things converged at the right time. That doesn't happen normally. It's super fun as a hockey fan when you watch those teams sneak in. But look at the last several Stanley Cups. The last 5 have had the Lightning, the Panthers, the Oilers, all of these with marquee talent. The last 2 have featured the Oilers versus the Panthers in back-to-back series. And it doesn't look like the Panthers will make it back, but into the playoffs even. But that's understandable because their players have played by going through back-to-back Stanley Cup runs, they've played almost another full season of hockey that other teams haven't. So they have more injuries, they're tired. And I get it. And to their credit, they do too, because they decided to sell some assets and understand that this is not their year. But when they come back healthier next year, when they get, they will hopefully build around new goaltending, as Bobrovsky is not the guy. Then they have a chance to compete. The Oilers, on the other hand, don't. And this is another whole conversation I actually would have loved to have with some of the panelists at the conference, and I'll get to that in a minute too. But they have still been held out by goaltending. There were goalies that were available that they probably didn't even try to ask. I actually bet that if they came to the Predators and asked for UC Saros for the right price, the Predators would have sent him, because he is probably the most valuable player right now, since we don't have natural goal scorers as much. He's still young enough. He's not on an expensive contract, a few years left on it. We made the decision for him over Askarov. Askarov would have, from the Sharks, his name had been floated around. Didn't happen. So the Oilers are trying to get back. They are definitely not as good as they have been the last 2 years. They were flying by the NHL. It was not really a question if they would win their division. And right now, they don't look like a threat. And again, it's time and time again, it is goaltending, and they chose not to fix it. And this sort of shows, I don't know if it's analytics, I don't know if it's decision making in management, but how you see these stark differences is why some of these teams win. And it's somewhat as just acknowledging the truth. And Florida has done a phenomenal job with that. And Florida is one of those anomalies. They are not where they are because they drafted a top 5 player. Their decision to go all in on Matthew Tkachuk looked like it was going to blow back in their faces. People thought that was a significant overpay. How can you give up all of these guys? Weegar, Huberdeau. Then you look at how they are with the Flames. Their careers are petering out. Weegar just got traded to the Knights. The Panthers managed to then still be aggressive. Go get Marchand. They've signed Barkov. They've signed all of their guys to long-term deals. And again, I think just so much of that is this active recognition of reality behind where the team is. So to see that Nashville did not, it felt like they got it. And then they were like, just kidding, we didn't. Or like, we're not sure. Maybe cold feet. Look, Barry's leaving. This would have been an opportunity to just go all in. To just say, we are selling. I'm not even going to have to be the one that talks about what we do with those picks. And I think most people would have supported the decision to sell as much as you possibly could. But again, here we are. And now the Predators are beginning a West Coast trip. And this game tonight against the Seattle Kraken will have the biggest impact for a while, probably, on playoff odds. I just saw, I think, from Money Puck, that if the Predators win in regulation, their odds of making the playoffs will go up to a whopping 25%. And if they lose, it will fall to around 12%, lose in regulation. If they win or lose in overtime, they'll be hovering around 20% either way. These aren't convincing. Then they still have the Oilers and the Canucks, and I believe the Jets. And some of those are winnable games. The Oilers have always been the Predators' kryptonite. The Canucks are not good, but I'm sure that, going on the road, they might find a way to lose. What I will say, though, is because the Predators are finding a chance for players like Fedor Svechkov, Zach LaRue, Matthew Wood, Ryan Ufko, and maybe even more soon to come up, I think that the opportunity to fight for the playoffs, given that we're not going to be the bottom 5 team in the league at this rate, pending like a huge losing streak, could be fun to see how this team competes, to see how do the young guys put up a fight when they have nothing to lose, but maybe they are able to hang more than we thought. Maybe they can big body their way into some games, keep it close, get some upsets. For nothing else, get the experience of making a playoff run. But if they don't make the playoffs, we can still be satisfied with our upside and our future. Would have liked to have a little bit more. I think that the Predators should still look to trade O'Reilly or Stamkos in the offseason, but or at least at next year's deadline. But I wouldn't look at this as like a clear binary decision to say that if the Predators do somehow make the playoffs, it's now a bad thing. I think it would have been a bad thing like prior to the trade deadline, that if they hadn't actually managed to sell off some assets, then making the playoffs would have convinced ownership and management that we were good enough. And we simply were not. And I think that most people are very solidly convinced about that narrative. So I'm now feeling a little bit more at ease, not as much as I would have liked, but that we get to see some of the future Predators make their way through to get some experience. And it makes it a little bit more fun to watch. It takes off some of the pressure. I was actually telling one of our other panelists from Saturday, Megan Shaika, who's I believe, the CEO and co-founder of Stathletes, that in some ways, while I love playoff hockey, there is something a little relieving about knowing your team is not participating, because I can enjoy the on-ice product and know that we are not supposed to be there right now. And for the last several years, it would be really stressful because it felt like we were trying to force a square peg into a round hole. And maybe we shave off a corner, get a few goals, or, I think it was against Vancouver in 2024 that we put up a little fight and then it just disappeared. So kind of with that now, I want to talk a little bit more just about the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. Definitely a shameless plug. We do not get paid to help work with the putting the conference on or any of the promotion around it. For those who have never heard of it, look up SSAC 2026. And the way it started is 20 years ago, Daryl Morey, who's the general manager of the Philadelphia 76ers now and previously with the Houston Rockets, he went to MIT Sloan, and he and a friend of his who went to Harvard Business School, who's the CEO of the Kraft Analytics Group now, but at the time, they both saw a lot of the value in sports analytics, and not just in sports analytics, but in sports business and sports as a business and as an asset. And not just also that, one step further, they saw the value that I think a lot of sports fans would agree with, is that sports is a way of building community, building opportunities for people who have not always been given opportunities in sports. So there's a heavy emphasis on people from underrepresented communities to getting into sports, or who are in sports, and pave the path for women's sports and leaders in women's sports. And it's a really remarkable conference, and it's grown so much from, I think, around 100 people the first year to this year we had 2,500 people. So it's a planning committee. It's fully run by students, which is one of the most exciting parts, and that we work on it all year. And the last 2 years I've been on our content team, and the content team is the one in charge of coordinating the panels. And then what we have are called competitive advantage speakers, who do a little bit more of a deep dive into their niche, their research, the product that they've been working on that might be more cutting edge in AI, analytics. Maybe it's around dynamic pricing, maybe it's around geospatial movement on a hockey rink. So this year I had the pleasure of working on several panels, but I want to, this is a hockey focused podcast. I want to talk a little bit about the hockey experiences that I had. One, I was a part of planning. One, I was a part of just watching and really enjoying it. So the one that I had the pleasure of planning was, and now I've alluded to it some, was with Bill Daly, who's the deputy commissioner of the NHL, Megan Shaika, who's the CEO and co-founder of Stathletes. For those who might be wondering, yes, her brother is John Shaika, who, when he was hired, must have been, I don't even want to do the math to age myself too, but he was 26 when he was hired as the GM of the Coyotes, which made him the youngest GM in NHL history and probably will never be beaten. And then Marty Walsh, who is the executive director of the NHLPA, former mayor of Boston, and he was also I think the Secretary of Labor in Joe Biden's cabinet. So a stacked crew. It was so much fun to have all of these guys and women together, moderated by Warren Zola, who is a great professor and executive director at Boston College and led like a really great conversation. So my first plug is go check it out. All of the panels will be posted publicly if they haven't already on YouTube or the sports conference website. So look it up. It's called The Future of Hockey. And there were a lot of just exciting topics that were discussed. And I think they range from, where do you see the game growing next? Which I touched on before was around the Predators Red Wings game that was played on as a Monday matinee. And we touched on it last week too, on the hype of hockey. So they all are in this agreement that Europe is probably next to continue growing the NHL. We've already seen some games in Europe, in Prague, Switzerland, I think Sweden. Actually, I know Sweden. And that's great because there are hockey fans. They already understand the game. That's actually something that the panelists talked about. They understand hockey. They don't need to be sold on what the game is or how it's played. But what they do need to be sold on is the league and the NHL itself. So I am all in favor of finding new ways of growing revenue for the NHL. But I think a lot of people would have liked to see more questions or answered around why are we running into Europe rather than maybe tapping more into the US market. I would say US and Canada, but I think Canada is probably fairly saturated. Like people in Canada who want to watch hockey have their team, they're watching it. It is accessible. There are a lot of people in the United States who are missing out because they don't know how great it is. And some expansion markets are working, but the Olympics was so good for that. So what is the NHL's first decision? Well, they play a 2 p.m. game in Eastern time, or 3 p.m. game Eastern time, 2 p.m. Central time, so that people in Europe, I think it was mainly like Sweden, was the target audience, would be able to watch. Okay, cool. Philip Forsberg is Swedish. There's like a big Swedish tie there. But as a result, way fewer people can go to that game. Like, who is able to get off of work so easily in the middle of a Monday afternoon? And baseball teams do this all the time. They're used to it. That is part of the culture. There's probably a lot of people that take off work or do it with work as an outing or school. But that's not the hockey way here. And to me, this just feels a little like the Predators and Red Wings community were incredibly confused. There was no communication. There was no, we're trying to make a series about this. So while, again, I'm all for, they think that some of the next markets will be Germany, Switzerland, and the UK in particular, because they have the infrastructure and the fans. That's great. But you know what? The Premier League has figured out how to get Americans to watch British soccer without changing their times. So how do we do that? How do we draw in the European fan base? Why don't we make more Saturday and Sunday matinee games? Saturday at 2 p.m. is a relatively untouched. It used to be a thing when NBC actually had the rights that almost every Saturday and Sunday, there was usually a big game, especially as we got during the playoff push. And those are the moments when I remember Doc Emmerich really just his voice reverberating through my living room. And now they're not treating it as much like a business opportunity, but more like how do we sandwich in the schedule? So my wish on that topic would be that the NHL tries to maximize the viewership here in the United States and overseas so that they can maximize all forms of revenue, continue to grow the salary cap, which was a big conversation too. There are many other things that they ended up talking about. I think that, it was an analytics conference. So one of the things that was most exciting to hear about will impact scouting. So keep an eye out for this, people. It used to be that if you wanted to follow a player overseas, which is where a lot of NHL scouts come from, you had to go in person because you definitely weren't getting film or stream on them. And then even still, if you wanted to, let's say, monitor the puck in their game or their movement, you would have to ask them to put a chip in the puck or on their jersey. And then you'd be able to get advanced analytics. Well, we are at a time now when you don't even have to be there and you can still track the puck. you can still track the player on your own software at home. And this is sort of funny for Predators fans, at least, and I'm sure many other teams have a story like this. But Pecorine was a backup goalie in Finland when David Poyle was told by a scout that we have to go to Finland, and not only do we have to go to Finland, we have to go for warm-ups because the scout we're looking, or the prospect we're looking at, will not be playing. Quite a bold statement to give your general manager before you make it such an expensive and long trip. Well, turns out that he was actually backing up a future Hall of Famer over in Finland, and it worked out, and it was a great decision. But imagine if you didn't have to do that, and how much more accessible international talent is now going to be able to become, and to be able to understand them with more analytics, and not just, I like the way that this guy skates, but I don't know how this translates to an NHL rink or NHL style of play. So all kinds of things were super exciting about that, and I definitely recommend giving that a listen. There are a few other hockey-related panels and competitive advantage speakers. For instance, one guy who leads, he's the director of business intelligence with the San Jose Sharks, talked a lot about how they've been using this Macklin Celebrini surge to make dynamic pricing to keep their old fans coming back and to get new fans. And they've done an amazing job to fill seats. And I think that it's a good reflection of how any business should try to treat their customers, but also hopefully how other hockey teams will be able to grow and continue to build their own arenas. Because everyone I talk to says that hockey is the best sport to watch in person. And I believe it. And I think that everyone also agrees that a lot of events have been getting priced out of normalcy. And so to see how they were maximizing the way to say, look, you should come, we can make it affordable, and it's a good on-ice product, super exciting. The last one that I'll touch on here is there was a panel that was a little bit more on the on-ice analytics. And on that panel was also Megan Chayka. I'm blanking on this woman's name. I believe her name is Angela, but if I am wrong, please do not burn me at the stake here. She's a former U.S. gold medalist hockey player and current broadcaster. And then who I think everyone was maybe most excited for, John Bluesky, who was the U.S. women's hockey coach who won the gold. And it was very funny for me as I'm helping to set up the conference. I go into the green room and I just see him there as after seeing his face all over the TV while he's in Milan. And okay, cool. I give everyone their space. I go into I had a chance to actually watch this panel and forget the game itself, like the outcome of any of the games. The way that he talked about analytics is something that I hope every NHL team is listening to, because it was really astute and it felt like just one level ahead of where other teams might be doing it. And again, you have to keep in mind, this is for a national team. They don't even play regularly. They're not getting paid much. It's not a professional endeavor for them. So he uses data from Megan's company's stathletes, and they learned a lot. So they had played a lot of friendlies with Canada, and their third line in all of those friendlies had been amazing. It was scoring and defending at will. And come the Olympics, that team just couldn't get anything together. And they were looking at the analytics to try to reaffirm and understand why. And as a result, he was able to make some decisions using the analytics to make line decisions. Now, but my favorite use that he had is if you go back to the U.S. women's gold medal game against Canada, they tied it with just under 2 minutes to go, or right around 2 minutes to go. In the play, it's a shot from the blue line that's deflected by Hillary Knight and it goes in. But what a lot of times people forget in hockey is it's not just the shot or the deflection that makes it a goal, but it might be something that was 3 steps behind it. And you'll never see credit for that on a stat sheet, but sometimes it is the most important part. So the U.S. has pulled their goalie. They have no goals in this game. Offense has gotten some pressure, but they haven't been able to convert. Well, they're in the face-off circle now. And I cannot remember right now who is taking the face-off. I don't think it was Megan Keller, but it might have been. And she has a 72% win rate in face-offs. That's unheard of. in hockey. Like if someone is 60+%, that is considered one of the best in the league. You're going to even put them in just for the faceoff alone and then take them off the ice as soon as you win the faceoff. So not only does she win the faceoff for the United States, it's a clean win. And even John makes this great point how we need to be differentiating more between a clean win and one that comes out of a tussle. And the difference is that if you get a clean win and it goes straight out to your player, you now have firm possession. You have a player without any defender on them who is able to control the offense. If there's a bit of a toss up for it, there's more of a melee. It's a lot harder to establish possession, even if you do get the puck to go towards your own player. So important to note that it's a clean win. And because they knew how good this player was at faceoffs, they were able to actually stretch their offense farther away from the faceoff circle because they didn't have to worry about a loose puck. They were able to say, we are so confident we're going to win this. We're going to win this cleanly. We're going to set up a really clean offensive zone entry. Well, not even a zone entry. We are in the offensive zone, a super clean offensive play that within seconds led to the game tying goal. So it was really great to see his breakdown of that and to get that coach's perspective. And unfortunately, the conference oftentimes falls around the trade deadline in the NHL. So we're not always able to get coaching talent unless maybe they were in town for the playing against or for the Bruins. Last couple of anecdotes about John, and I just want to give him like a big shout out for anyone who's still listening about this. He clearly like super great guy and really enamored and excited about the team. And Angela, who was again, if I'm messing up the name, I greatly apologize, had come into the green room, and she mentions and sees John and just kind of like erupts and it's like, John, we did it. And it was just this, and explain this on stage that there's just this, it went from I'm super professional, multiple gold medalist, broadcaster to still kind of that kid in us. And then when I was walking around the conference later, ran into John in the hallway, and he was very willing to chat 5-10 minutes. And it's clear that he had a great time at the conference, but I think it really set a good example for anyone who's looking at how to best use statistics. He's clearly a strong leader, managed to lead the women's team so well. I clearly sees the value in men's and women's sports and how to, effectuate that change on and off the ice. So nothing but great things to say about him. And for the entire conference, I recommend that people tune in for anything that you would be interested in. There were 39 different panels, so I'm sure there's something that will pique your interest. And then, as always, I want to kind of close out with another a favorite, maybe Nashville Predators moment of mine. And there are so many that I could probably continue to pick from. And I'm going to pick one that actually is close to one that I've already said before. So the first one that I mentioned was in Game 3 of the second round in 2016. The Nashville Predators had been playing the San Jose Sharks, and Mike Fisher won the game in triple overtime. I woke up my roommate, yada, yada, yada. I am exhausted. The Predators because I had to go to sleep so late, Predators started making shirts that said, you can sleep when the playoffs are over. I think a lot of NHL teams sort of embrace that attitude. And Game 4, you're thinking, my God, we need to win this game because we're now down 2-1 at home, but we got to win this game. And we are now down to the Sharks in the third period again, and again, tie it pretty late. I am on student government at this time, and we had a student government meeting at the beginning of the game. So I am watching on my phone. No offense to the University of Chicago students who I was supposed to be supporting and standing up for. I was fully dialed into this playoff game, and I leave this basement classroom that we were in, and I sprint to my friend's house. I am watching on my phone the whole way. And he's not even a hockey fan. He just wanted to watch the game with me to watch me watch the game. And I'm getting nervous now for him because we are going to overtime. And the last one had just gone to triple overtime. And so I'm pacing. I am a nervous wreck, and he has no concept, I think, as to the full extent of the pains of sudden death overtime hockey in the NHL. And fortunately, in this game, Mika Salamaki from his own zone lobs a bouncer, just a soft clear, and that bounces right around the blue line. It was not intended to be a zone entry by any means, but Victor Arvidsson, who is now on the Bruins and is actually having a great season for them, he manages to pull this puck in between multiple defenders and just it bounces perfectly. And I'm not kidding. You look at the angle. Arvidsson's skate is like where my hand is to the if this is the ice. He has this crazy balance, and he's able to maintain the puck and goes top shelf on a backhand. And we're 2 minutes in, so I'm going nuts. I'm in my friend's place, and he's sort of just entertained by me, and I pumped. I mean, also just pumped that I can go to bed at a normal time this night. But it's just we would end up losing the next two games. The first one was close, the last one was not. But it was just they brought great memories and great electricity to Nashville hockey. And to really be able to get some of those overtime wins was awesome, and get those in the books, because that was just not a part of our identity. We had lost several of those in our history. And so I'm going to wrap it up there. But thank you, everyone, again, for tuning in for Broadway and Breakaways for the third episode. Twitter handle is at Adam Biesman, Biesman. I can't wait to see how the young guys do. Maybe we got some of the dirtiest part over with, but now we can kind of sit back, relax. There's nothing else that management's going to do, and it's time to just perform. At the very least, we'll enjoy some playoff hockey together. All right, everybody. Have a great day. Go Preds.